Drive Time on RTE Radio 1, sponsored by Zurich. When family is all that matters, make sure they're protected. Visit zurich.ie to learn more about life and serious illness cover.
Now, you might have seen small wooden houses called bee hotels that are for sale in garden centres and supermarkets in recent weeks. They are artificial nesting structures and they're designed to attract pollinators by giving them small cavities for egg laying. But what should we be looking for in a so-called bee hotel? And do they actually work? Well, I'm joined now by Jane Stout, who's Professor in Botany in Trinity College Dublin and co-founder of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. And Jane, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
No problem. Hi.
We're seeing it everywhere now, really, aren't we? People trying their best to help biodiversity where they can. You see it in the unmown verges and the lawns that have been going wild and the wildflowers and all of this. And now we have bee hotels. Are they helpful, do you think?
They can be helpful. I mean, it's brilliant to see everybody taking action for bees and other pollinators. I guess the thing to say about the bee hotels is that we've only 15 of our 99 native species of bee that would nest in such a structure. The rest of them would nest in the ground. So whilst they are really useful for some species, they're not helping all species. And also, it depends on the type of hotel and where it's put as to how useful it is for those bees.
Okay, so that doesn't sound like an awful lot of bees would actually use it. What type of bees would use a hotel? Sorry.
So there's we have social bees that live in colonies, and you've got a queen and the workers and the thing that everybody's familiar with. But most of our bee species are actually solitary. So the bee hotels are actually for solitary bee species. So this is where a female will collect some pollen to feed her larvae. She'll lay her egg, and then she'll actually seal the cell where she's put the pollen and the egg, and she'll go off and she'll leave it to develop on its own. So that's the way in which it's solitary. So the way that they use these bee hotels is the hotels are full of tubes, and what the bee does is she puts the pollen, lays her egg, and then she seals off a little cell, and then she repeats that process until the tube is full. And so in that way, the tubes in these bee hotels provide these cavities for her to lay her eggs in. Then she goes off and she leaves them alone to develop on their own.
So sorry, just to be clear then, is it the same bee that takes over the whole hotel, or is it like different bees renting a room? It's
probably the same bee that fills up one tube, but depending on the types of bees that you've got in the locality and depending on the size of the tubes, you could have different species of bee using the same hotel. So we think it's probably the same individual that fills up one tube, but you may have several individuals using the same hotel, if that makes sense.
Okay. Are there different features then, if you wanted to buy one of these for your garden, that you should look out for?
Yeah, you should be looking out for tubes of a range of diameter, but not bigger than about 10 millimetres. So our native bees here in Ireland, in fact, we don't know a huge amount about them. We are still doing the research to try and find out what kind of size tubes, but between about 4 and 8 millimetres. And if you've got a variety of different sizes of diameters of tubes, then you might get a variety of species nesting in there. And you can actually see if you've got different species because they use different things to plug up the tubes. So whereas some species use soil or mud, other species use leaves. So you can sometimes see this difference when you look at the face of the hotel.
Are there
you're looking
any...
for a variety of...
Sorry to interrupt you, Jane. Are there any potential problems with these then that you wouldn't foresee that could cause issues for the bees?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the problems is that if you've got lots and lots of these bee hotels or lots of tubes in one location, then they can become a reservoir for pests and diseases. And also, if you site them in the wrong place, so if they get damp, then they can go mouldy, basically, and get fungal infections. So you do need to look after them. You can't just stick one in the garden and leave it there forevermore. It would need to be maintained and cleaned out so that it didn't become a reservoir for pests. And also, you don't want to put a huge, massive insect hotel because, again, that could become a reservoir for disease.
All right, so don't get multiple bee hotels. Stick with just the one. You don't want competition in the area. But also, you want it in a nice sunny spot. You're thinking Spain, not.
Yeah, so a south-facing wall or a south-east-facing wall, and it has to be quite well secured so that it doesn't get knocked off by birds or predators trying to find the bee larvae to eat on.
And when you say it needs to be maintained and cleaned, when do you do that? Is that an annual thing, and how do you go about it?
Yeah, it needs to be done annually because the bees take almost the whole year to complete their life cycle. So if you put a hotel out now and it gets colonised now, those bees won't actually emerge as adults until this time next year. So it's once they've emerged, you then need to clean them or replace the tubes so that they can be used again by the next generation.
And could you come across some angry bees if you're in the midst of that? Do you need to take certain precautions?
Oh, they're very calm. I imagine what they would do is fly away rather than attack. They're very, very calm. It's not like they're defending a nest in the same way that a honeybee would.
Okay. What else can we do then if we want to, so just as a general point, before I ask you what else can we do, would you recommend them, Jane, these bee hotels? Are they a good thing on balance?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it doesn't do everything. So obviously, because there's only a handful of species that use them, you need to do other things as well.
Okay, and just briefly, you might talk us through what else we can do for the rest of the bees then.
So I mean, the other thing that bees need is food. So if you put these hotels in your garden, you don't have any flowers, then they're not going to be useful at all. So providing a variety of different types of flowers throughout the season is also really important. But also for all the other species that don't nest in bee hotels, leaving some undisturbed areas of your garden so that they can nest in the ground is really, really important.
All right, really interesting. Well, thank you so much for joining us to talk us all through it. I think I'm sold on the bee hotel. Oh, just finally, can you put one up at any time, or in terms of the life cycle?
It's best to have it out for the spring, so you probably should put it out in early spring. That's probably the best time.
All right, full of knowledge. Thank you so much for giving us all those pointers. That's Jane Stout, Professor in Botany in Trinity College Dublin.